Critical thinking is an indispensable intellectual tool that allows us to expose tricks of propaganda, expand our knowledge horizons, and maintain our intellectual independence.
Dear Russian citizens, once again a real war has been waged against our motherland. The United States and Great Britain are provoking bloody conflicts and coups, all in order to continue to dictate and impose their will on peoples. Their goal is to achieve the collapse and elimination of our country. And we are aimed at demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine to achieve this goal.
In the 16th century, Pope Gregory XV created the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith, known as the Sacred Congregation de Propaganda Fide. At that time, propaganda was aimed at spreading the Catholic faith and controlling ideological issues. With the advent of the mass media, propaganda gained great power and took on a different form. And in the hands of Adolf Hitler and Vladimir Putin, it has become an instrument of obedience and abolition of critical thinking.
The Nazis invented a lot of brand new tools to affect the psycho-emotional sphere. The same large-scale events, holidays, symbols, visuals, and music. And Putin, after all, did not invent anything. The endless information background where Russians' brains are boiled so that they simply stay in a state of altered consciousness, similar to what Hitler used to create in his mass meetings, is now created and maintained by Russian television.
Постійно створюють і продовжують саме на телебаченні.
At the beginning of their careers, Hitler and Putin did not have any strategies or development programs for the next 5 or 10 years. But the people believed them. They adored them.
In order to successfully control and manipulate masses, one must find some common pain spot that is the same for the entire society. For Germans, for example, it was a defeat in World War I. For the Russian Federation, it was a collapse of the Soviet Union. Both Hitler and Putin used this for their political purposes. It's a coincidence, but what a wonderful coincidence.
Propaganda is a special rule of the game, imposed, clear, without alternative. Therefore, after the war, in order not to get ourselves a third Fuhrer, we must already understand what to do with our neighbors.
They must be destroyed.
Those who live in the opium haze of propaganda narratives.
I've been working for the Kremlin for more than 20 years. I keep spreading propaganda, and not a single bastard wants to lock me up.
Immediately after coming to power, Hitler and Putin began preparing for a great war, making people blind weapons in their hands.
Glory to Russia, glory to Putin, Crimea belongs to us.
The Germans said the same thing when they realized that they would have to answer for their crimes. But they remained silent when Hitler created the Reich Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda.
Goebbels said, the more incredible the lie, the faster it will be delivered. And he accomplished his goals. He was a talented man.
The most interesting thing is that Putin said that during a meeting with leaders of Jewish organizations.
Without a doubt, Goebbels is an influential figure for Putin because not having the tools of influence we have today. For example, social networks or media platforms in a huge number or internet vision, YouTube and so on and so forth. He still had total control over the minds of a large number of people.
Hitler's Reich lasted only 12 years, but in this short time the Nazis managed to turn the nation of Germans into an army of zombies. How did they do that? The answer is given by the psychological experiment called the Third Wave. 1967. An ordinary American school. While studying the history of the Second World War, one of the 10th graders asked history teacher Ron Jones how ordinary Germans could pretend to know nothing about the concentration camps and the mass genocide of the Second World War. Jones based his answer on the work of Hitler and Goebbels and decided to demonstrate to the students how it worked.
But I wanted my students to feel it, to sense it, to let it inhabit their bodies, not just read about it.
The first thing the Nazis did after coming to power was to demand absolute obedience and submission from the German nation. Jones did the same. On the first day of the secret experiment, he ordered his students to sit straight, to speak concisely and clearly, with the content of the answer being of secondary importance. At the second stage of the establishment of the Reich, Hitler proclaimed, "There is strength in discipline, strength in community and cohesion." The 10th graders at the American school shouted the same motto with the same enthusiasm on the second day of the experiment. At the end of the lesson, Jones showed a simple zigzagging gesture and called it the Third Wave Salute. The third day of the experiment was held under the motto "From words to action."
How to have membership cards, a salute, trials about being a part of the group. And I was amazed at how easy students gave up their freedom for the thought of being superior to their neighbors.
On the fifth and final day of the experiment, Jones told the students that there was no such thing as the third wave, and that the students' actions were not much different from the Nazis.
Given that childhood is characterized by extreme curiosity, extreme need to learn about the world, that is, normal cognitive functions are working. Children can be molded into anything, and the future image, the future personality, depends on how the child is brought up.
We will win the war. If we lose, we will destroy the whole world.
Not only children's mentality can be broken. The feeling that you are unique and belong to a group of such unique people imposed from the outside overshadows your mind.
In Russia, people don't want to think. It's a country of consumerism. You drink, eat, go to work, turn on the TV, there are Nazis, children are being eaten. It's a pretty primitive way of living.
Young people are clay from which you can mold anything. The Nazis understood this very well.
Those who own the youth own the future.
The Hitler Jugend became the forge of future military and ideological personnel.
The task of these paramilitary teenage organizations was to take a person out of the family as early as possible, to mold his or her consciousness, to immerse him or her in the world of ideology, to remove from their heads the taboo of killing a person. For instance, the same Jewish classmate with whom they had previously sat at the same desk.
Putin, who is used to copying Hitler in everything, also has his own Hitler Jugend, the Young Army. website of the Russian equivalent of Hitlerjugend, there's so-called Alley of Glory to heroes who died in Ukraine during the so-called special military operation. An alley of young men who went to Ukraine without any hesitation to kill other children, rape women, and torture pensioners.
Єльцинське покоління.
The Yeltsin generation of their parents. It is actually no less terrible. In fact, every sixth teenager was serving a sentence for criminal acts. The vast majority of them had no secondary education, and they all had children and started families. And these are their children, this Putin's generation, with a tremendous energy of destruction inside them.
Енергію знищення.
The psychological portraits of the Nazi SS and concentration camp guards are completely identical to the portraits of the Russians, the Bucha rapists. The maximum dissemination of information about the atrocities of the Russian army in Ukraine bringing to justice not only the ideologists of the war, but also the perpetrators, is a vaccine for the future generation of Russians.
What's behind us?
За нами.
A ruined building.
What is the Russian world bringing here? There was a shop in this ruined building. Who did it bother? What hit it and why was it destroyed?
Зачем его разрушили, уничтожили?
I don't know why they gave the coordinates of this building. I cannot answer this question.
What is Russia bringing to the table globally?
I don't understand.
Usually when someone comes in with something, they share good things or something interesting or useful.
This is the triumph of Russian weapons. This is the triumph of the Russian army. This is the revival of Russia.
So, what are the principles of taking away critical thinking from a person? The first principle is accessibility and consistency.
They chained them to the bed.
12-year-old children were raped.
But that's not all.
When people see and hear the same narrative every day, they unwittingly begin to believe it.
Barricaded and burned alive. Next.
There are facts about cannibalism.
Didn't you know about it?
In Hitler's Germany, slogans were heard all the time. They could be seen on every corner, in the newspaper, on posters, and even on shop paper. The situation is the same in Russia.
A lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth.
The second principle is simplicity. Propaganda should be accessible and primitive.
War! War for Mother Russia!
One of the most effective ways to influence the emotions of the entire nation is to tap into its most sensitive points to appeal to its collective traumas.
Heroes of the past and heroes of the present are examples of service to the people and to the homeland, and we are proud of our homeland, history, and all your lives.
Russians easily accept the primitive constructs that Putin talks about, and what Putin is saying is, it's hard for you, but we will make it harder for them. Now you can get up and go looting, and people like it. Today, the Russian community is made up of 95% of the most primitive people who live in the present, in which there is only my I that must be satisfied.
The third principle is the right balance between truth and lies. Goebbels once said that if you add 1/4 of the truth to 3/4 of a lie, people are guaranteed to believe you. The Russian ideological machine works exactly the same way.
If I'm not mistaken, that is Poroshenko's decree. I read it today. The military will be provided with preferential housing in Donetsk and Luhansk after the victory.
A soldier is asked in Ukrainian news, why did you go to fight in Donbass? He said, I was promised land, a house and 5 slaves.
In addition to fabricated information, fictitious sources are used and quotes taken from reliable sources are distorted.
If I may quote, "Listen, human cub, I taught you the law of the jungle, but bandar logs obey no law. There are many bandar logs."
I have loved Kipling since childhood.
Завдання тих людей, які
The task of those people who turned Russia into a totalitarian system is to digest the entire political and mental space into a homogeneous system in which one super idea is boiled down and everyone is driven by it.
нею рухаються.
The fourth principle is to change the vocabulary and the system of images. It is based on not calling things that can frighten society by the proper names.
I am launching a special police operation on the territory of Poland.
I have decided to conduct a special military operation.
Both Fuhrers strictly avoid the word war, and in Russia you even can go to jail for it.
Our plans do not include the occupation of Ukrainian territories. We are not going to impose anything on anyone by force.
The fifth principle of propaganda, the rotten herring. It is to come up with the dirtiest, most scandalous accusation possible and to involve as many experts and viewers as possible in its discussion.
The most vulnerable and most effective is the first impression. The first impression that a person gets when looking at or perceiving something. This, by the way, is the basis of neural linguistic programming technology. That is a vivid picture that first appears in the human sensory system. It can be sound, it can be visual image, and it is permanently fixed in the subconsciousness.
Rus is great, indivisible, orthodox, and united.
The sixth principle is the demonization of the enemy. The Nazis scared the Germans that Jews drink the blood of babies. And the Russists attribute equally horrible things to Ukrainians.
They took a 3-year-old little boy in panties in a t-shirt. They nailed him on a board like a Jesus. One was nailing him and the two were holding him.
The seventh principle is the cult of personality. The leader is the personification of the state, and his image should be on monuments, posters, murals, and even icons.
Влетела птица, кровожадная орлица, но пришел Владимир Путин и сказал: жить лучше будем. Владимир Путин, молодец!
Criminal abuse of the mentality will have simply catastrophic consequences for these people in the future. If they are lucky enough to live and survive and not to be eliminated, as a significant number of them were already eliminated in Ukraine since 2022.
If you compare Hitler's and Putin's parades, the only difference is the symbols.
All these key letters Z, V are from his favorite movie 17 Moments of Spring. Putin is more primitive than the creators of German Nazism. He didn't come up with some other ideology. Putin simply proposed that we will come, look, kill, and so on. They will be afraid of us because we are like muggers. We are from the streets.
The eighth principle is euphoria, the cult of ancestors and constant reminders of past victories. This method is used to lift up the morale of the people.
It was the Red Army that, as a result of the devastating storming of Berlin, put a winning end to the war with Hitler's Germany. And now the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the military generation are in a single parade line.
They have been researching for many years. They were looking for a point that could be used as a hoop to grab hold of and pull every soul that existed and lived in the Russian Federation. And this mythical great patriotic war from the past turned out to be such a point.
Another elegant example is that Putin launched a full-scale war in Ukraine on February 24th, just after Russia had celebrated the Defenders of the Fatherland Day holiday on February 23rd.
Who are we?
The Yurga Battalion.
What do we want?
Blood.
What are we going to do?
Kill.
The ninth principle is the search for a common enemy.
Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism. He saw that the attitude after the First World War was very favorable. This immortalized theme of the creator Jew, the internal Jew who prevents everyone from having a good life, who takes away everything that is the best, that this is the case of their troubles here and now.
Putin followed the same principle. He declared Ukrainians the enemy. And the soldiers took home toilets and household appliances.
If Nazi Germany wanted to dominate through a certain ideology, that's why there was a Holocaust and other massacres of ethnic grounds. For Putin, it's domination through fear. For him, there is no difference in ethnicity. Except for Ukrainians, it's a little different. We have killed all the myths on which the concept of personal Putin's dominance was built. He will no longer exist as a historical character, he will be remembered as an ironic historical character.
And finally, the 10th and most important principle of propaganda is that it should be light and entertaining. The Nazis moved away from the classical propaganda with political rallies, slogans and banners and put on an unforgettable show for the Germans, endless parades during the day, and the apotheosis of Hitler's appearance on the podium. At night, fireworks from thousands of spotlights and mass torch processions. Putin also often organizes grandiose celebrations, gathering hundreds of thousands of people in squares and stadiums. If you think critically, you realize that all these attributes, shows, manipulations are a path to the abyss. When you see your neighbor or acquaintance being crowned, carried in arms, when he's walking around with a torch and shouting Nazi, call an ambulance.
Don't you know about this?
Indeed, propaganda can easily mislead an entire nation. Immediately after coming to power, Goebbels established total control over all Germans' radio stations, and listening to foreign speakers was punishable by 5 years in prison.
Hello, Trumps, this is Nazi news. Thanks to our blockades, there is almost no bread in England, ha ha ha!
At the suggestion of the Minister of Propaganda, a massive production of cheap radios was launched, which people dubbed Goebbels' throat.
Britain has no electricity, the streets are heated with torches. Churchill is nervous again.
Hitler's propagandists even used radio to start the Second World War. On the evening of September 1st, 1939, listeners heard explosions, shots and shouts in Polish on the air. An anxious announcer says that the Poles had treacherously attacked a German radio station in the border town of Gleiwitz.
The Gleiwitz provocation is something that is probably included in old textbooks of diversionary special forces in all countries of the world. They managed to invent such a humiliating name as canned food for people who had previously been killed by lethal injection, and after thrown into the place of provocation as if they were victims of this conflict. Let me remind you that they were the prisoners of the Detached concentration camp who were unlucky not to only be the prisoners, but also to be used as a bargaining chip to create a precedent for the outbreak of the Second World War.
Another powerful lever of Nazi propaganda was cinema.
Cinema concentrates the attention of several senses at once. First of all, the first sensor is visual. Secondly, it is an auditory sensor. It was in Germany that the effect of the 25th frame was used. After the 24th frame, one frame was inserted on the film with the desired slogan or image. In Germany, it was a portrait of Hitler. This frame was invisible to the ordinary eye, but it was immediately imprinted on the subconscious mind. Those people were programmed.
Russian cinema has also been building plots for many years in such a way as to instill the gene of aggression in the viewer as much as possible.
You bastards will answer me for Sevastopol.
Silence!
70% of the Russian cinema box offices is about armed conflicts, gang warfare, murder and maniacs. This is how the viewer gets used to blood violence and aggression.
We lack this man today. For a long time. If I had the power, I would hand half of them and shoot the other half.
Russia is just a gangster who wants to be allowed to behave lawlessly.
Crimea is not enough for us. Is a Russian city. Is a Russian city. Is a Russian city.
Pumped up with toxic propaganda, Russian soldiers are raping Ukrainian women and children without any remorse. And Kremlin journalists and speakers are justifying this genocide in every way possible.
They are doing hard men's work.
The Nazis were able to turn even documentaries into a real art of mind manipulation. Talented filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, a friend of Hitler, helped them with this. Her film Triumph of the Will has become a classic work of documentary filmmaking. The main message is that all of Germany's troubles began with the outbreak of World War I. Now, true patriots have come to power, and they, led by Hitler, will make Germany great again.
Hitler is Germany. Germany is Hitler. Sieg Heil!
The Kremlin ideologists have not only paraphrased this Nazi slogan, but have brazenly stolen many others. Compare yourself.
One nation, one empire, one Fuhrer.
One country, one president, one victory.
On March 22, 1935, Hitler's propagandists gained television in their arsenal. It was then that imperial broadcasting was first aired.
In Germany, by order of Goebbels, so-called television rooms were created at every large enterprise, all in order to show the necessary narratives to their citizens every day, for 1 hour to form a certain worldview.
Goebbels was in a great hurry to upgrade German television by 1936, as the 11th Olympic Games were to be held in Berlin.
The entire mystification was a success. The Olympics were held at the highest level. It was one of the factors that outraged Hitler to take his further actions, and it cultivated in him a sense of his own superiority and all permissiveness.
49 countries took part in the Berlin Olympics, more than at any previous games. The Nazis were celebrating. Berlin Olympics were held according to plan. The international press recognized that Germany had organized the most successful games in history.
I declare the 22nd Winter Olympics in Sochi open.
Putin also desired success, world recognition, and spent more than $50 billion on his Sochi Olympics. And according to old Russian habit, the lion's share of the money was simply stolen.
Just for you to understand what 50 billion is, this is the cost of all the sports facilities of all the Winter Olympics in the history of mankind. In fact, this is the largest fraud in the history of Russia.
However, all the world's attention was focused not on the Olympics but on the revolution of dignity on Kiev's Maidan, which made the Kremlin Tsar incredibly angry. In addition, green men were already secretly operating in Crimea.
This has always been an element of Putin's pressure on Western leaders. What are you going to do? How ready are you to respond? He saw that they were not ready, so he could go ahead and put pressure, and he could take the territory of another state.
Goodbye, Russia!
These words of the IOC president proved to be prophetic. Russia finally took a course of aggression and began to pull the Iron Curtain. A week later, Putin's troops annexed Crimea, taking another step toward war with Ukraine.
We do not need to be protected from anyone. Our Crimea has been and is Ukrainian, and all you want is blood. Do you understand?
The Kremlin Fuhrer began preparing for this war back in 2000 with the siege of NTV television. Putin was well aware of the power of television, and it was television that had raised him to the top of the political ladder.
The Russian television industry is technically and financially unique in the world. Likewise, the channels that have been broadcasting the ideas of the Russian world for many decades abroad have no comparison in the world.
Do you use social networks, or are you going to use them? Do you watch YouTube?
The internet, which was difficult to control at first, was a hindrance to Putin. But even here, the authorities found a way out. Independent resources were repressed, journalists were demonstratively killed in the streets. Later, Putin's ideologists invented the label foreign agent, taking away licenses and traffic sources from unfriendly media outlets.
We didn't coin the term foreign agent. This law has been in effect since the 1930s in the US. It was adopted in 38 to 39. I think it was 38. And it works perfectly.
The logic of Putin's actions in the media space has remained unchanged over the years. If you are not with us, you're against us.
This is a classic technology. A severe psychological pressure is like a sign during the Holocaust, which Jews received to be sent to the ghetto or killed at any time.
Nazi scum, Bandera bastard, Ukrainian and Nazi asshole.
Putin's propagandists have created millions of channels on Odnoklassniki, Vkontakte, Telegram social networks to spread the same false information. In addition, the Kremlin employs so-called troops on couches, several thousand hired internet trolls whose duties include attacking those whose views differ from the official line.
Russians are called monsters.
A significant part of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, certainly not all, I hope not even the majority, they were caught up in the madness of Nazism.
All Russian media resources work according to the Kremlin's guidance, which clearly states that Ukraine is pseudo-state.
Who created it? Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. When he created the Soviet Union.
Perhaps that's why Putin decided that he has the right to tell Ukrainians how to live and whom to elect. A vivid example is the year 2004, presidential elections in Ukraine, Yushchenko versus Yanukovych. Realizing that the ex-convict would lose to Yushchenko, Putin immediately came to Kiev.
I would like to thank Viktor Fedorovich for his practical approach to all the problems we discussed.
Thank you.
Putin hoped to use his authority to put a puppet candidate in the presidential seat, but Ukrainians could not care less about the Kremlin Fuhrer's opinion.
There is aggression towards Russians, and the only idea is constantly being pushed war.
The whole world knows it. Russians cannot be defeated.
The second Maidan of 2014 was another loud slap in the face to Putin. And a slap in the face of his propagandists in Ukraine, which the new Fuhrer still cannot forgive.
It was scary to go outside. I cried bloody tears when I saw people killing each other for nothing. The economic collapse of the whole country is ahead. Ukraine is flying towards it, following a predetermined trajectory. Passengers will be hurt, not everyone will survive.
For several decades, TV has been the mainstay of Putin's propaganda.
Everything that is said on television in the Russian Federation is believed to be potentially true, and ultimately true. We can safely state there is a so-called effect of holy icons. That is an idea of unquestioning trust in television. It's just elevated to the rank of a cult.
One of the most important aspects of manipulation through television is excessive emotions.
Get away from me! Security!
When a person is overwhelmed by emotions, logical thinking is automatically turned off. That is why propagandists are constantly hysterical and screaming like pastors of totalitarian movements.
Satanic bastards! Devils! They are enemies. They are on the side of evil.
From a psychological point of view, the more and louder the host shouts, the less people can resist this propaganda, and the more effectively this narrative, that is, this propaganda, is perceived. The alternative objection is not taken into account. Let's go.
Another important point is the distorted reality. The fooling of the viewer with the stream of contradictory information in order to completely disperse the truth and create a pseudo-reality. A vivid example is the Bucha massacre. Any fact about this crime is immediately followed by lots of disinformation.
When they depicted the use of chemical weapons by the Assad government, it turned out to be fake. The same fake is the case of Bucha.
They thought it would be like this: Russia would come in, take control, everyone would be shocked, everyone would be silent, everyone would say sanctions, and then Russia would do the following: it would show the places of mass graves of our people, release the movie Bucha, and say that the Nazi regime of Ukraine did this.
For Putin, for the motherland is increasingly heard on Russian television. In early 2023, the ideologists ramped up the psychosis even further. They urged Russians to prepare for long, exhausting war.
Death is inevitable. Death awaits us all. It is better to die like this and for some right and important thing.
Another propaganda channel that is sending people to their death is the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church can be called one of the Kremlin's most important propagandists. In his confusing sermons, he distorts Christian values.
Go and fulfill your military duty with courage. And remember, if you sacrifice your life for your country, you will be with God in His kingdom, in His glory, in His eternal life.
However, the cult of a sacred death is not an invention of Russian propagandists. They also stole this postulate from Goebbels. In 1944, when the Wehrmacht was suffering enormous losses, the Minister of Propaganda of the Third Reich found a magic key to mobilize society. It is called negative propaganda.
As an agent of propaganda, there was a narrative that either we will win or we will all be in Siberia if they win. Therefore, this alternative was not perceived as figurative. People believed that it was better to die than to live there. Moreover, the idea was actively promoted that it was better to die as a free man than to live as a slave to our enemy.
At the Nuremberg trials, along with the Wehrmacht leaders, Reich propagandists will also try the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, stormtrooper Julius Streicher, radio host Hans Fritzsche, and many other Nazi mouthpieces. They blamed Hitler until the very end, saying that they were just carrying out orders. Russian propagandists will blame Putin in the same way.
Drown these children, drown them. If you are told that the Muscovites are occupying, you immediately throw them into a Spruce hut, beat them to death and burn them.
This will not end well for them. There will be either legal punishment or physical punishment, and this will be done in Russia itself because they will be afraid of us, so they will make claims against people like Krasovsky. And the third option, who says that the drone cannot know whose house it is flying over?
A hard sobering up awaits Russian society as well, and Putin's soldiers will also blame Putin for everything.
I'm not a politician, I don't know why they are doing this, I'm a small person.
Guys, I'm 19 years old.
Why did you come here?
They sent me on a mission.
Where are you from?
The city of Arkhangelsk.
Are we going to win?
People are so brainwashed that they cannot perceive other information. A prisoner says, I'm a captive. The mother says, you are being tortured there, not fed. And he said, no, I'm fine, I've been treated, I had an operation. I don't believe you. That's not what we see on the TV. When a mother doesn't believe her son, propaganda works. The billions of dollars they pour in are working.
At the Yalta Conference in 1945, the members of the anti-Hitler coalition developed and approved a program to denazify Germans who were war criminals. The Nuremberg trials were only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, almost every third German turned out to be a Nazi collaborator.
Країна, що вже колись була в тоталітаризмі.
A country that has once been under totalitarianism is always under the threat of its return. The return of Russianism has shown that totalitarianism does not just disappear. If the tools for destroying the seed of totalitarianism are not fully developed, then one cannot stop.
Просто з насіння, то зупинятися не можна.
This time, all those responsible must be punished. And if we are to draw historical parallels here, the tribunal should take place in Yalta. It wasn't Putin who dropped bombs on the Mariupol drama theater with the sign "Children" on it. It wasn't Putin who tortured Ukrainians. It wasn't Putin who blew up the Kakhovka HPP, causing the biggest environmental disaster of the century. It was the Russians who did it.
There should be total responsibility in full for all citizens of the Russian Federation. There should be significant restrictions in Russia, significant restrictions on the cultural product. There should be significant restrictions on expansion, any expansion of Russia. I mean external expansion, informational, cultural, and so on. There should be certain movies showing TV shows about what Russia did in Ukraine. And Russia should be an isolated country for a certain period of time.
The main fault of the Russians is that they have actually given Putin a license to war by their silent consent. History must not repeat itself. There must be a complete denazification of Russians. Perhaps under such conditions the Third Fuhrer will not ascend to Olympus in the future, and the Third Reich, the Third Rome, will be buried under the tombstones of history.